It started with a sealed legal folder quietly removed from a private archive once connected to Princess Diana's final estate planning meetings. For years, palace insiders dismissed rumors that Diana had altered key inheritance protections shortly before her death. But when senior lawyers reportedly reopened those documents during a confidential review tied to Prince Harry's finances, everything changed. And the reaction inside royal circles was immediate, emotional, and deeply unsettling for a family already divided by years of mistrust. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the discussion surrounding the documents was treated as nothing more than another round of royal speculation. The monarchy had survived decades of whispered allegations, hidden letters, private arguments, and disputed inheritance stories. Yet this situation felt different almost immediately. Reports suggest the legal review was never supposed to become public knowledge at all. According to insiders familiar with old estate procedures connected to Diana's financial arrangements, several senior legal advisors quietly revisited archival materials linked to trusts established in the years before her death. The purpose of the review remains unclear, but various interpretations of the meetings describe an atmosphere of tension the moment Harry's name appeared repeatedly throughout the paperwork. What stunned those involved was not merely the existence of financial protections. Diana had always been known as a fiercely protective mother, especially when it came to the emotional well-being of her youngest son. But whispers now emerging from within royal administrative circles suggest she may have gone much further than anyone publicly understood. Some insiders claim Diana feared Harry would one day find himself isolated within the institution, vulnerable to shifting alliances, palace politics, and the brutal realities of royal hierarchy. While William's future as king gave him an automatic layer of security, Diana reportedly worried Harry would spend his life searching for stability in a system designed around someone else's destiny. That fear, according to sources connected to the legal review, may have shaped the hidden clauses now drawing so much attention behind palace walls. Lawyers allegedly uncovered language tied to protective inheritance structures intended to preserve Harry's financial independence, regardless of future institutional conflict. The details remain heavily guarded, but reports suggest the documents reference safeguards designed to prevent outside influence over portions of Harry's inheritance. And for a royal family already fractured by years of accusations, interviews, memoirs, and emotional distance, the implications were explosive. The emotional impact reportedly hit Harry hardest of all. Insiders whisper that he was left devastated after learning the extent of Diana's private concerns about his future. Not because of money itself, but because the documents allegedly revealed how deeply Diana feared what royal life might eventually do to him. Those familiar with the conversations describe Harry becoming unusually quiet during portions of the review, particularly when discussions turned toward Diana's long-term intentions and her efforts to create protections that would survive beyond her lifetime. For years, critics accused Harry of abandoning the monarchy out of bitterness or resentment. But inside these newly examined documents, some now believe Diana's own anxieties about the institution were quietly waiting to be rediscovered. The situation became even more sensitive once Prince William and several senior palace advisors were reportedly informed about the existence of the legal review before the story began leaking externally. Different interpretations of those private briefings describe concern, caution, and growing unease about how the revelation could reshape public understanding of the royal divide. Because this was no longer just another inheritance story. It threatened to reopen emotional wounds dating back to Diana's death itself, while also forcing uncomfortable questions about whether her fears regarding Harry may have ultimately come true. And as whispers spread through royal circles with increasing urgency, even longtime palace insiders reportedly admitted that something about the discovery felt profoundly unsettling. As though Diana's voice had suddenly returned to the center of a family conflict that never truly disappeared. But the deeper investigators looked into Diana's final legal decisions, the clearer it became that this wasn't simply about money, it was about fear, protection, and a mother who reported. Wiley saw danger coming long before anyone else did. Long before the public breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage reached its bitter conclusion, whispers inside Kensington Palace suggested Diana had become increasingly anxious about Harry's future. Not William's the future king was protected by destiny itself. It was Harry she reportedly worried about most. And according to several royal commentators, those fears intensified during the final years of her life as tensions inside the royal household became impossible to ignore. At the center of Diana's growing concern was a painful reality few, within royal circles, wanted to openly acknowledge. William and Harry may have been brothers, but they were never destined to live the same life. From the beginning, the monarchy itself created a divide between them. William was the heir, the future sovereign, the boy around whom the institution would eventually reorganize itself. Harry, however, occupied a far more uncertain position. Loved publicly, celebrated by crowds, but privately vulnerable to the brutal mechanics of royal hierarchy. And according to insiders who have spent years studying the final chapter of Diana's life, she understood that imbalance better than anyone. Reports suggest Diana became deeply troubled by what some palace aides allegedly referred to as the spare dilemma. The fear that once William matured into his role as future king, Harry could slowly drift into emotional isolation within an institution built entirely around preserving the crown. Several royal commentators have since claimed Diana worried Harry's purpose inside the monarchy would become increasingly unclear as he grew older. The applause, the public affection, the glamorous appearances, they could not shield him forever from the reality that the system ultimately revolved around someone else. And for a mother already battling loneliness, betrayal, and institutional pressure herself, that realization reportedly became impossible to ignore. Those fears only intensified after the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage turned increasingly bitter behind palace walls. Different interpretations of Diana's later years describe a woman whose trust in royal structures had begun to fracture completely. She reportedly became convinced that emotional vulnerability inside the monarchy was often treated as weakness, rather than something deserving of protection. Insiders whisper that Diana believed the institution had ways of quietly freezing people out once they no longer fit the role expected of them. And according to several accounts tied to former palace staff, she feared Harry's emotional nature made him particularly exposed to that kind of long-term damage. It was during this turbulent period, reports suggest, that private legal consultations surrounding Diana's estate allegedly became more serious and more secretive. Lawyers connected to her financial affairs were reportedly brought into quiet discussions not only about inheritance distribution, but about long-term security itself. While much of the public assumed Diana's estate plans followed conventional royal arrangements, insiders now claim she explored additional protections specifically focused on Harry's future independence. Not merely financial comfort, but safeguards designed to ensure he would never become fully dependent on palace approval or institutional favor. What makes these claims so explosive today is the emotional context surrounding them. According to various royal observers, Diana's concerns were never simply about wealth. They were about survival. Within a system she increasingly viewed with suspicion. Some insiders even allege Diana privately discussed the psychological burden Harry might carry as the younger brother forever standing beside the future king, yet never fully belonging to the machinery that protected him. And as years passed, those anxieties reportedly deepened into quiet determination. Royal insiders now claim certain legal protections connected to Harry's inheritance may have been intentionally kept away from public scrutiny for decades, buried beneath layers of discretion and silence that only now are beginning to crack open under renewed examination. And while the public believed Diana's estate plans were straightforward, behind closed doors, another layer of protection may already have been quietly taking shape. The moment Prince Harry reportedly saw the confidential legal language tied to Diana's estate, those present say the atmosphere changed instantly. What he believed for years about his inheritance may have only been part of the story. Because buried within those old protections were alleged clauses designed not just to provide wealth, but to shield him from future royal pressure, institutional control, and even internal family disputes that Diana feared could one day erupt. According to several interpretations of the legal review now being quietly discussed across royal circles, the discovery unfolded with an intensity few expected. What began as a procedural examination of estate structures allegedly transformed into something far more personal and emotionally devastating. Lawyers reviewing Diana-era arrangements reportedly uncovered what insiders described as protective inheritance structures attached specifically to Harry's future. The language, while carefully constructed, was said to focus less on luxury or privilege and more on independence. Freedom, security, protection from forces Diana may have believed would eventually close in around him. That revelation reportedly stunned even some of the professionals involved. For decades, the public narrative surrounding Diana's estate remained relatively simple. Her sons inherited wealth, trusts matured over time, and the story appeared settled. But insiders now whisper that parts of Diana's planning may have operated on an entirely different level beneath the surface. Some claims suggest she anticipated the possibility of future institutional conflict involving Harry long before the public ever witnessed the fractures that later tore through the royal family. And according to several commentators now revisiting her final years, Diana's fears no longer appear as irrational suspicions whispered in private moments of vulnerability. Instead, they are beginning to look disturbingly calculated. Reports suggest the legal language emphasized financial autonomy in ways that raised immediate questions among those present. Allegedly, certain clauses were structured to preserve Harry's ability to maintain personal independence regardless of changing relationships within the monarchy itself. Not simply protection from outside exploitation, but from internal pressure as well. Some insiders familiar with the discussions now claim Diana worried Harry could one day find himself emotionally cornered by the institution, dependent on systems that might eventually seek to control or isolate him. Whether those fears were justified remains fiercely debated. But what unsettled many observers was how closely Diana's alleged concerns mirrored the conflicts that later exploded into public view. Those familiar with the review say Harry himself reportedly struggled to contain his emotions as more details emerged. Different interpretations of the meeting describe long silences, visible distress, and moments where conversations allegedly stopped altogether while portions of Diana's intentions were explained more carefully. Because this was no longer about inheritance in the traditional sense. It was about discovering that his mother may have spent her final years quietly trying to build safeguards around a future she feared could become emotionally destructive for him. Some insiders now describe the discovery as Diana's final shield, a last attempt by a mother to protect the son she believed might one day stand alone against forces far larger than himself. The emotional weight of that possibility reportedly spread quickly through palace-adjacent circles once word of the review began leaking beyond the immediate legal teams. Royal commentators who once dismissed stories about hidden protections suddenly found themselves reconsidering long-standing assumptions about Diana's state of mind during her final years. Why had these structures remained hidden for so long? Who made the decision to keep them quiet? And perhaps most unsettling of all, how many people inside the institution already knew fragments of the truth while publicly maintaining silence? Those questions now hover over the monarchy like a gathering storm, because if Diana truly anticipated future conflict involving Harry decades before it unfolded publicly, then the implications reach far beyond inheritance itself. They cut directly into the emotional history of the modern royal family and the private fears Diana may have carried until the very end. But as Harry struggled to process the revelation, another uncomfortable question began spreading through royal circles who already knew these protections existed. As rumors surrounding Diana's secret inheritance protections exploded behind palace walls, attention quickly shifted toward Prince William and senior royal advisors. Because according to multiple interpretations of recent meetings, some members of the institution may have known fragments of this story for years. Not the full picture perhaps, but enough to understand why Diana had reportedly gone to extraordinary lengths to protect Harry differently from the future king. The moment whispers about the confidential S's began circulating beyond the immediate legal teams. A new layer of tension reportedly swept through royal circles. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer focused solely on Diana's fears or Harry's emotional reaction. Instead, attention turned toward a far more uncomfortable possibility. Had certain senior figures inside the monarchy quietly known about these protections all along? Reports suggest that the question immediately created unease among palace advisors already struggling to contain the fallout from the revelation itself. Because if fragments of Diana's intentions had remained buried within private discussions for decades, then someone, somewhere inside the institution, may have chosen silence over transparency. Prince William's name reportedly emerged early in those discussions, not because of accusation, but because of proximity. According to several royal commentators, William was allegedly informed during confidential legal conversations once the review uncovered language tied specifically to Harry's long-term protection. Different interpretations of those meetings describe a deeply tense atmosphere, shaped by both caution and emotional sensitivity. William, after all, occupied the center of the very dynamic Diana reportedly feared most. The future king, the protected heir, the brother whose destiny inside the monarchy was never uncertain. And while insiders insist there is no evidence William knew the full extent of the protections beforehand, whispers continue suggesting he may have heard fragments of Diana's concerns years earlier through private family conversations that were never meant to resurface publicly. That possibility alone was enough to reopen old wounds many believed had never truly healed. Because beneath the legal language and inheritance structures lies the painful shadow of the heir and spare divide that haunted both brothers throughout their lives. Royal commentators now describe the current situation as emotionally explosive, precisely because it forces the monarchy to revisit a reality it long tried to soften publicly. William and Harry may have shared tragedy, privilege, and global attention, but their positions inside the institution were never equal. Diana reportedly understood that better than anyone. And now, decades later, her private efforts to protect Harry differently are once again dragging that imbalance into the spotlight. Palace aides, according to several insider accounts, allegedly moved quickly once rumors about the protections began spreading externally. Discussions surrounding old estate documents were reportedly tightened, communications became more controlled, and concerns grew about additional leaks reaching the press. Some insiders claim senior advisors feared the revelation could reshape public perception of Harry entirely. Because if Diana genuinely anticipated future emotional conflict involving her younger son, then many of the accusations directed toward him in recent years suddenly become far more complicated. The story no longer appears as simple rebellion against royal duty. Instead, it begins to resemble the fulfillment of fears Diana quietly carried long before the world witnessed the family fractures explode in public. What reportedly shocked even those closest to Harry, however, was the depth of his emotional response once more details surfaced. Different interpretations of private conversations describe moments of disbelief, grief, and visible pain as he confronted the possibility that his mother may have spent years privately worrying about exactly the struggles he later endured. Some insiders now claim Harry was particularly shaken by the realization that Diana's concerns were not vague emotional anxieties, but deliberate, documented attempts to shield him from pressures she believed could one day overwhelm him. And as that realization settled across royal circles, the atmosphere reportedly became heavier, more emotional, and infinitely more dangerous for an institution already burdened by years of mistrust and unresolved grief. Yet the most devastating part of the entire discovery wasn't the money, the clauses, or even the secrecy. It was what Diana allegedly wrote about Harry's emotional future. Those familiar with the private discussions surrounding Diana's estate now claim one detail left even seasoned legal professionals shaken. Because beyond financial protections, reports suggest Diana expressed deep concern about Harry's emotional vulnerability inside royal life itself. And according to insiders whispering about the newly examined papers, she feared he would one day feel isolated, expendable, and abandoned by the very institution he was born into. What made the discovery so emotionally devastating was not simply the existence of protective clauses or carefully structured inheritance safeguards. It was the deeply personal nature of the fears allegedly attached to them. According to multiple interpretations of the private estate conversations now resurfacing through royal circles, Diana's concerns extended far beyond wealth or status. She reportedly worried about Harry's sense of identity itself. His place within a monarchy that celebrated him publicly while simultaneously defining him by what he would never become. Not the heir, not the future king, not the center of the institution's survival. And insiders now claim Diana feared that painful reality could slowly erode him emotionally over time. Several sources familiar with the review suggest portions of the legal language carried an unusually intimate tone, one that reportedly surprised even experienced professionals accustomed to handling royal financial matters. Lawyers allegedly described certain passages and discussions as deeply personal, less like standard estate planning and more like the emotional concerns of a mother trying desperately to protect her son from invisible wounds she believed were already beginning to form. That emotional undercurrent, NT reportedly changed the atmosphere surrounding the review entirely. What had started as a confidential legal examination suddenly became something haunting. A rediscovery of fears Diana may never have fully voiced publicly while she was alive. Reports suggest Diana became increasingly troubled during her final years by the possibility that Harry would grow up struggling to understand where he truly belonged inside royal life. According to insiders, she allegedly feared he would spend years trapped between privilege and emotional isolation, visible to the world yet privately uncertain of his value within the institution itself. Different interpretations of her concerns describe a woman who believed Harry's emotional openness made him especially vulnerable inside a system often built around restraint, hierarchy, and duty before personal feeling. And while many dismissed those anxieties at the time as maternal overprotectiveness, the parallels now being drawn between Diana's fears and Harry's later experiences have left palace insiders deeply unsettled. Harry himself, according to several accounts connected to the legal review, was reportedly devastated hearing portions of Diana's warnings repeated aloud years after her death. Insiders whisper that the emotional impact had little to do with inheritance figures or legal complexity. Instead, it came from realizing how accurately Diana may have anticipated the emotional conflict that later consumed his relationship with royal life. The public battles, the sense of estrangement, the repeated claims of isolation and misunderstanding. For years, critics framed Harry's departure from royal duties as rebellion, entitlement, or personal resentment. But within these newly examined discussions, some now see a far darker possibility emerging that Diana recognized long ago: the emotional pressures that could eventually push him toward breaking away entirely. That realization has reportedly created growing anxiety among palace advisors already concerned about the monarchy's fragile internal relationships. According to several royal commentators, insiders fear the public fallout surrounding Diana's hidden concerns could make reconciliation between Harry and the institution even more difficult, because this story no longer revolves around simple inheritance disputes or buried legal structures. It touches something far more emotionally, oceanal, and dangerous. The possibility that Diana tried to leave behind a warning about Harry's future emotional suffering, and that warning may have been quietly overlooked for decades, while the very outcome she feared slowly unfolded in front of the world. And as those whispers continue spreading through royal circles with increasing intensity, the monarchy now faces an uncomfortable reckoning with its own past, its own silences, and perhaps even its own failures. And as the emotional weight of Diana's hidden protections spread through royal circles, the monarchy suddenly found itself confronting a painful possibility: it may have ignored the very warning Diana tried to leave behind. What began as a quiet legal review has now reportedly evolved into one of the most emotionally explosive inheritance revelations connected to Princess Diana in decades. Inside royal circles, aides are said to be deeply concerned about the long-term impact, not simply because of the money involved, but because Diana's alleged fears about Harry now appear hauntingly close to reality. And that realization may be impossible for the monarchy to quietly bury again. For years, public opinion surrounding Prince Harry moved back and forth like a storm that never fully settled. One moment he was viewed as the wounded prince trying to escape unbearable pressure. The next, he was portrayed as reckless, angry, and determined to tear apart the institution that raised him. But now, according to insiders following the renewed legal discussions tied to Diana's estate, the entire emotional framework surrounding Harry's story may be shifting yet again. Because if Diana truly anticipated his future struggles decades earlier, then many of the events that once appeared shocking suddenly begin to look tragically inevitable. And inside palace circles, that possibility is reportedly creating enormous unease. Several royal commentators now claim there is growing concern within the institution about renewed public sympathy toward Harry, not necessarily because of the inheritance itself, but because the story reframes him in a profoundly emotional way. The narrative no longer centers only on conflict, interviews, memoirs, or public accusations. Instead, it paints a picture of a son whose emotional struggles may have been quietly feared by his mother long before the world witnessed the collapse of his relationship. Ship with royal life. That shift changes everything, because it forces people to ask whether Harry was rebelling against the monarchy or whether he was slowly becoming the very person Diana feared the institution might create. Behind the scenes, reports suggest confidential legal reviews connected to Diana's estate are still ongoing. Insiders whisper that lawyers continue examining old structures, correspondence, and protections tied to her final wishes, while palace advisors remain deeply anxious about what additional details could emerge. Every new revelation reportedly risks reopening emotional fractures that the monarchy has spent years trying to contain. And nowhere is that tension believed to be more sensitive than in the already fragile relationship between William and Harry. According to multiple interpretations of recent palace discussions, aides fear the emotional weight of Diana's hidden concerns could deepen divisions between the brothers even further, particularly if Harry begins viewing his mother's warnings as validation of everything he later experienced inside royal life. At the center of all this stands Diana herself, once again dominating royal headlines, after her death. And perhaps that is what makes the situation feel so haunting to those watching it unfold. Even now, her presence continues to shape the emotional direction of the monarchy. Her fears, her instincts, her unresolved battles with the institution. Royal commentators increasingly argue that Diana may have understood the emotional consequences of royal hierarchy more clearly than almost anyone around her at the time. While others focused on titles, appearances, and public stability, she reportedly saw the quieter damage forming beneath the surface, especially in Harry, especially in the child who would always stand close to the throne without ever truly belonging to it. That realization now hangs heavily over the monarchy itself. Because the deeper this story goes, the harder it becomes to dismiss Diana's concerns as simple paranoia or maternal anxiety. Instead, many are beginning to wonder whether she recognized painful truths about royal life long before the institution was prepared to confront them publicly. And if that is true, then this inheritance revelation is no longer merely about hidden protections or confidential clauses. It becomes something far more diva, stating, a final message from a mother who may have spent her last years trying to shield her son from a future she feared was already moving toward him in silence. Because in the end, the most heartbreaking part of Diana's secret protections may not be the inheritance itself, but the possibility that a mother saw her son's future pain long before the world ever did. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.